welcome back. Today we're looking at Julius Caesar, Act 1. Now, Julius Caesar, as you probably well know, is one of Shakespeare's Roman plays. He has a handful of these. He has the sequel, Antony and Cleopatra. He has the dark slasher tragedy, Titus Andronicus. And he has the somewhat overlooked Coriolanus. But Julius Caesar is definitely his most famous. And in this story, he has a lot of the greats of Roman tradition. Brutus, Caesar, Cassius, Antony. These characters are kind of larger than life in Shakespeare's day, and within the story, they almost recognize their larger than life status. There are times when the characters talk about themselves in third person, as if they are these great figures of history. One of the most iconic of these is Cato, and although he doesn't feature in the actual story, he's referenced several times. He's a hero who fought for Rome and committed suicide when he lost a battle to hold on to his freedom. His heroism and his larger-than-life status are referred to frequently. But even the characters that are in the story are frequently acknowledged as being very significant. You're Brutus, you're Caesar. Don't you recognize how important you are? And although Shakespeare's playing a little bit with the iconic figures, he also makes them very, very human. Although they're standing in the role of an iconic figure, they are also dealing with things in very complex and human ways. Not only that, but Shakespeare uses these giants of history, with their deep sense of humanity, to explore political ideas that have been relevant throughout all of history and are still relevant today. You can pick up this play and look at your own political leaders. Look at the way information is handed down and passed around. Look at the way people are manipulated and prodded into certain beliefs. And you'll see that Shakespeare is always relevant. This play and the play Coriolanus are two of those that address the common people the most. The relationship between the plebeians and the patricians. Of course, when we're looking at the first act of a Shakespeare play, we're talking about exposition. We're talking about introducing character, we're talking about introducing conflict, and introducing setting. And the way all those things mesh together to create story. A lot of Shakespeare's plays open with minor characters who introduce some of the problems and then step out of the play. This is true with Julius Caesar, although it happens in a rather dramatic way. Flavius and Marullus, two senators, rush into the scene and see all these people celebrating. What are they celebrating? Well, it looks like at first that they're celebrating the return of Caesar to Rome. But Flavius and Marullus are concerned because they think that once Caesar arrives in Rome, he's going to take absolute power. He's going to declare himself emperor. And when he does, the Senate will lose power and there will be a huge political shift. So Flavius and Marullus berate the people and say, "You're out here cheering and singing for Caesar. Didn't you just a little while ago cheer and parade for Pompey, the other great hero? And then after Caesar beats him and then comes back home, you cheer for the other side. You all are wishy-washy, you're fickle. Run to your houses, fall upon your knees, pray to the gods to intermit the plague that needs must light on this ingratitude." And Flavius says, "Go, go, good countrymen, and for this fault assemble all the poor men of your sort, draw them to Tiber banks, and weep your tears into the channel, till the lowest stream do kiss the most exalted shores of all. Go cry a river, peasants." And all the common people go, "Oh, okay," and they all march off. It's at this point that we realize it's not just Caesar's return that has them all celebrating. This is actually a holiday. They actually have a right to have a holiday here. It's the Feast of Lupercal. But Flavius and Marullus go and take down all of the decorations because they don't want any honor to fall on Caesar. And we get the first of a series of metaphors we use to describe Caesar. I talked about that larger-than-life idea, and several characters are going to talk about it too throughout. Caesar is huge. He's so big and he's so important, but he's also just a regular person. And in order to deal with his bigness, our characters are going to keep using big, complex metaphors to talk about Caesar. The first is Flavius here, who describes him as an eagle soaring above everyone else. The rest of us peasants are down here on the ground, and we look up and there's Caesar. And Marullus and Flavius have, they've had a good run. They're senators. They've been holding the power so far, but they see Caesar rising above them, and they don't want that. So instead of letting him become this larger-than-life figure, they need to take him down a peg. Flavia says, "These growing feathers plucked from Caesar's wing will make him fly an ordinary pitch. Who else would soar above the view of men and keep us all in servile fearfulness? We don't want this pompous Caesar flying way up above us. We're gonna pick a few feathers out of his wing and take him down to our level." Okay, so first metaphor for Caesar, the soaring eagle. We cut to Caesar at the Feast of Lupercal, who has been celebrating, and here he is with his wife Calpurnia. And Calpurnia has not yet produced him an heir, which is kind of a problem. And Caesar, thinking he's so important, decides to publicly announce that he is putting Calpurnia in front of him, so that when the Feast of Lupercal race goes by and Antony taps her, she will become pregnant. What? It's part of tradition that someone who is touched in the race at the Feast of Lupercal will lose their barrenness. This is a fertility festival. But notice how he summons her up, like, publicly. "Calpurnia!" And then Casca, who's standing there, "Peace ho, Caesar speaks." "Calpurnia!" And she steps up in front of him. "Here, my lord." "Stand you directly in Antonius' way, when he doth run his course." So he calls out so that everyone has to get quiet, and then he tells his wife, basically in front of everybody, and announces, "Antonius, you make sure you tap her in your race. Calpurnia, make sure you're standing in the right spot. Everyone here? Everyone good?" In the middle of this, a soothsayer steps up and tells Caesar to beware the Ides of March. And again, he has to make a big deal of quieting all the crowd and calling the man up in front of him, and then he just laughs the man off. The Ides of March, of course, are the 15th of March. It's the day that Caesar historically died. And so Caesar receives this cryptic warning that's going to echo through the rest of the play, at least until he dies. And so our first impression of Caesar is that he is exactly what they said. He's a pretentious, obnoxious, full of himself leader. In case we don't get that impression clearly, it's going to be reinforced very soon. But everyone goes off to the races, and we zoom in on Brutus and Cassius. Brutus decides to stay behind and not watch the race because he's got a lot on his mind. Namely, he's worried about his friend, Caesar. He's afraid that Caesar is going to take power, just like many of the other senators are. And he doesn't know what will happen if that happens. We see in this Brutus's concern, both for his friend Caesar, but even more so for Rome. He cares a lot about what's going on, and he wants to be there to step into his role as a hero for Rome. Also are introduced to Cassius, who does most of the talking here, while Brutus kind of sits there and mulls things over and listens. We also see that Brutus is also listening carefully for the sounds of the race, and he keeps being distracted from Cassius's words by noises he hears over the race. He's thinking about Caesar. He's thinking about what's going on. And yes, he has half an ear for what Cassius is saying. Cassius is introduced, and Cassius is complicated. He kind of dances his way to a point. And we see, as we've already seen, that characters don't always tell the truth. Just as Marullus and Flavia said, "It's not a holiday, you guys get home." Well, it was a holiday. They were manipulating the situation in order to bring Caesar down. They weren't stating the whole truth. Here, Cassius again is using somewhat manipulative language and argumentation to try to get under Brutus's skin and change Brutus's thinking. This whole play is an excellent exploration in argumentative fallacy. So many of these characters make arguments and then either don't back them up very well or draw unsupportable conclusions from them. Look at this conversation between Brutus and Cassius. The first thing Cassius says is, "Brutus, you look so down. Do you just not love me anymore? You don't care about me? I'm your buddy and you're just kind of being all cold towards me." So at first he makes Brutus kind of want to open up and be apologetic and be like, no, it's not you. I just have a lot on my mind, a lot going on. Brutus says, "Cassius, do not be deceived. If I have veiled my look, I turn the trouble of my countenance merely upon myself. Vexed I am of late with passions of some difference, conception only proper to myself, which give some soil perhaps to my behaviors. But let not therefore my good friends be grieved, among which, Cassius, you be one, nor construe any further my neglect than that poor Brutus, with himself at war, forgets the shows of love to other men." I'm sorry, I'm just, caught up in my thoughts a lot. It's not that I don't like you anymore, Cassius. Don't think that. I'm just, having a hard time right now. And then Cassius turns it around into flattery. The next thing he says is, "Oh, Brutus, but Tell me, can you see your face? And Brutus is like, no, not without a mirror. And so Cassius is like, I'll be your mirror. Let me describe what kind of person you are, Brutus. And again, he makes that Brutus into a larger-than-life character. You're a hero, Brutus. You're an amazing person. Jumping in with the flattery. So first he makes Brutus feel bad a little bit for not, being more warm and welcoming. And then he turns around into flattery on Brutus, making Brutus, feel good about himself and show how much he cares about Brutus. I care about you so much, Brutus. You're such an amazing person, Brutus. Brutus is a little bit skeptical at first, but he's won over quickly. He says, into what dangers would you lead me, Cassius, that you would have me seek into myself for that which is not in me? You're painting me larger than I really am. What is it that you want out of me? And Cassius is like, no, I'm not that kind of person. I'm not a flatterer. Were I a common laughter, or did use to stale with ordinary oaths my love to every nude protester? If you know that I do fawn on men and hug them hard after scandal them, or if you know that I profess myself in banqueting to all the rout, then hold me dangerous. You don't have to worry about me. You know me. I'm a trustworthy guy. But before they can go any farther, they hear some sounds over at the race. It sounds like people shouting and cheering, which sets Brutus on edge. And Cassius takes this opportunity to note that Brutus probably doesn't want more accolades on Caesar. And Brutus is like, oh, okay, but get to the point. I mean, what is it that you really want to talk to me about? Because Cassius has been working his way around and around and around to get to the point. But Cassius jumps back to the topic of Brutus's honor. But he uses Brutus's honor, Brutus, you're an honorable man, to create a sense of contrast with someone else, Caesar. Everybody thinks so well of you, Brutus, but, look over there at Caesar. I had as lief not be as live to be in awe of such a thing as I myself. I don't want to be in awe of something that is, just a human being like me. I was born free as Caesar. So were you. We both have fed as well, and we can both endure the winter's cold as well as he. For once, upon a raw and gusty day, the troubled Tiber chafing with her shores, Caesar said to me, darest thou, Cassius, now leap in with me into this angry flood, and swim to yonder point? Upon the word, accoutred as I was, I plunged in and bade him follow. So indeed he did. The torrent roared, and we did buffet it with lusty sinews, throwing it aside and stemming it with hearts of controversy. But ere we could arrive at the point proposed, Caesar cried, help me, Cassius, or I sink! So Cassius is like, you know what, I'm human, Caesar's human, why is Caesar so high above us? And then he starts telling a story. And speaking of human, he's not even that great of a swimmer. He succumbs to elements just like anybody else. In fact, more quickly than I do. And this man is now become a god, and Cassius is a wretched creature and must bend his body if Caesar carelessly but nod on him. How come we're treating Caesar like a god? He's just a human like anybody else. And then he goes on to tell about a fever that Caesar had in Spain, and how Caesar was all crying and miserable. And Cassius is like, he's weak. He's pathetic. He's human. Why are we painting him out into this giant? And now they hear a second shout. So Cassius moves to drive home his point, saying, why, man, he doth bestride the narrow world like a colossus. And we petty men walk under his huge legs and peep about to find ourselves dishonorable graves. Men at some time are masters of their fates. The fault, dear Brutus, is not in our stars, but in ourselves, that we are underlings, Brutus and Caesar. What should be in that Caesar? Why should that name be sounded more than yours? Write them together. Yours is as fair a name. Sound them. It doth become the mouth as well. Weigh them, it is as heavy. Conjure with them. Brutus will start a spirit as soon as Caesar. Now, in the names of all the gods at once, upon what meat does our Caesar feed, that he is grown so great? Age, thou art shamed. Our second metaphor, Cassius calls Caesar a colossus. He's so big that here we are, he's like this giant, this huge thing way above all of us, and we're just like running around between his legs, under his toes. And yet, he's no different than we are. Caesar, Brutus, there's no difference in those names. They're just as valuable. And now our stupid Romans are taking Caesar and making him a god. What are we doing? Cassius' famous line, the fault, dear Brutus, is not in our stars, but in ourselves here, reflects the idea that they have control of their own destiny. It's not fate that has given Caesar all of this power and made them underlings, but it is their own choices, their choice to allow Caesar to rise to power, and their choice to do nothing about it. This also reflects Cassius' Epicureanism. He doesn't believe in the afterlife, he doesn't believe in fate or in omens, and so he believes in taking control of his situation himself, which is going to be very important through the rest of the play. Brutus is like, I think I get your point. Maybe we should talk about this a little bit more. And Brutus concludes saying, Brutus had rather be a villager than to repute himself a son of Rome under these hard conditions, as this time is like to lay upon us. Notice he talks about himself in the third person there. I am Brutus, and Brutus is the kind of person that defends Rome no matter what. I will do whatever it takes in Rome's best interest. That's going to be important. But here comes back Caesar and the rest of the crew from the race. And Caesar looks really upset. Something bad went down. And everybody around him looks a little bit cowed. And so Brutus and Cassius decide to talk to Casca and get the lowdown, what happened. But before they can, we get this wonderful little exchange between Caesar and Antony. Caesar looks over at Cassius and he goes, man, that guy looks mean. And he calls Antony over and he says, let me have men about me that are fat. Sleek-headed men, and such as sleep o'-nights. Yon Cassius has a lean and hungry look. He thinks too much. Such men are dangerous. So Cassius obviously has this kind of expression on his face that makes Caesar uncomfortable. Cassius looks hungry, like he wants to get something that Caesar has. And Caesar is... No, he's not afraid. Caesar's not afraid of anything. He goes on to correct himself and say, I rather tell thee what is to be feared than what I fear, for I am always Caesar. Caesar's not afraid of anything, but if I were afraid, I'd be afraid of that guy. He reads too much, he doesn't smile enough, he looks hungry. Not like you, Antony, you're always having a good old time. We shift back to Brutus and Cassius, who have pulled Casca to the side, and he tells them that the people offered Caesar the crown 3 times. What? I thought Caesar wanted the crown. Why didn't he take it from them? Because there are 2 ways you can get the crown here. 1 from the people or 2 from the Senate. Caesar wants the crown, but he wants to get it from the Senate because that's the legitimate government right now. If the Senate were to give Caesar the crown, then he would legitimately be emperor. But it's good that he has the people on his side right now. He's just waiting for the real power to come to him. However, in the middle of this, he also had an epileptic fit, which was embarrassing for him because it showed his imperfections, it showed his humanity, and showed his weakness. Of course, the people didn't mind, they just kept on cheering. So much so that the very sarcastic Casca says if he had killed their mothers, they wouldn't have cared. We get the hint that Cassius is beginning to draw together a few people and get them all on the same page. And we get the hint also that this is about opposing Caesar. But as Brutus exits, we see Cassius speak alone for a moment. And he says, well, Brutus, thou art noble. Yet I see thy honorable metal may be wrought from what it is disposed. Therefore it is meet that noble minds keep ever with their likes. For who so firm that cannot be seduced? Caesar doth bear me hard, but he loves Brutus. If I were Brutus now, and he were Cassius, he should not humor me. I will this night, in several hands, in at his windows throw, as if they came from several citizens, writings all tending to the great opinion that Rome holds of his name, wherein obscurely Caesar's ambition shall be glanced at. And after this let Caesar seat him sure, for we will shake him, or worse days endure. Sounds very much like a villain's soliloquy. He says, Brutus, you're very honorable, but I'm gonna manipulate you. If we had exchanged places and I were you, I would never listen to me. He then goes on to unfold his plan, which is to slip all these notes into places where Brutus will find them and make it sound like all the people of Rome are asking for Brutus's help, defending them from Caesar. Will Brutus buy that? Sure, because he thinks that he's the hero of Rome. It's a little bit easy. Is Cassius a monster? He's clearly manipulative. How do we feel about his relationship with Brutus? Well, we'll have to continue to think about it as we go forward. Is it all pure manipulation, or is there some authentic friendship to it? Scene 3 moves to a terrible storm. Crazy things are happening. It looks like ghosts and fire and lightning, stuff fighting in the sky, lions in the street. The somewhat stuffy Cicero bumps into the very sarcastic Casca, and Casca's terrified by the storm. And Cicero isn't quite so wowed by the storm, but he listens to Casca's tirade about how horrific it all is. He then asks if Caesar will be in the Capitol tomorrow, and wishes Casca good night. At this point, in comes Cassius, who seems to be reveling in this terrifying storm. And while Casca's like cowering from the lightning, Cassius is pulling his shirt open and saying, "Strike me, lightning, this is great!" Casca says, "What a night is this?" And Cassius says, "A very pleasing night, honest men." Casca sees the terrifying storm with all the weird omens in it to be a sign of something horrific coming. But Cassius, because he's an Epicurean, doesn't believe in omens. He sees all this crazy storm as just a really exciting experience, but there is no signs in it. It's a hollow thing, and it seems like something big and terrifying and full of warning, but then Cassius compares it to a man. "Now could I, Casca, name to thee a man most like this dreadful night, that thunders, lightens, opens graves, and roars as doth the lion in the Capitol, a man no mightier than thyself or me in personal action, yet prodigious grown, and fearful as these strange eruptions are." So yeah, he seems like this big, terrifying great thing's a huge, powerful storm. We have yet another metaphor. And yet, what is he really? He's just a man like us. And Casca says, yeah, and I've heard that the Senate is finally going to cave and give Caesar the kingship. But Cassius says, I would rather die than see Caesar be king. And if Caesar does become king, that's what's going to happen. I'm going to kill myself. Because no tyrant can ultimately take control of me. I always have control of myself. I have the choice. I have autonomy, no matter who takes power. And Cassius goes on and says, and so what power really does have Caesar if all of us have our own individual existential choices? The only reason he has any power at all, the only reason he's a lion is because the Romans choose to be sheep. We choose to give him power, and therefore he has it. And Casca's like, I completely agree with you. I would be completely on your side if you were planning to do something right now. And Cassius is like, you got me. At this point, in comes Cinna, who is another part of the conspiracy, and so Casca is introduced into the conspiracy, but there's still one more character they really need in order to legitimize their conspiracy, and finally take Caesar down. And that character is Caesar's closest friend, Brutus. If they have Brutus on their side, they can take Caesar down. How are they going to get Brutus on their side? Cassius has already been working at that. And so he gives Cinna a few letters to throw in Brutus's window and continue that campaign to confuse and delude Brutus to the point of thinking that it's in Rome's best interest to take Caesar down. Casca says, oh, he sits high in all the people's hearts, and that which would appear offense in us, his countenance, like richest alchemy, will change to virtue and to worthiness. If we have Brutus on our side, it's gonna make us look like heroes when we take Caesar down. If we don't, we'll look like villains. It's all in the way you spin the thing. And so we come to the end of Act 1. And we see here is a political coup about to take place. We have Caesar who's rising to power and some people who want to put a stop to it by assassination. Do they have good reason to? That is up for debate, but they certainly are trying to spin the political situation to where it looks like the right thing to do. And in order to do that, they have to have the right people with them, they have to stage it the right way, and they have to spin their arguments the right way, so that the people who right now love Caesar, but we know are changeable, will turn and love them instead. Will this plot be able to take Brutus in? Will they be able to legitimize their conspiracy? We will see as the action rises in Act 2. Corruption in the Senate? Former senators Marullus and Flavius were arrested today for allegedly vandalizing public statuary and threatening members of the plebeians who were out celebrating the Feast of Lupercal this afternoon in what appears to be a gross abuse of power. We talked to local businessmen at the scene. Oh yeah, Marullus and Flavius, they were totally insulting, and I was saying, hey, you've cobbled together a better argument than that? They were staring at me with fiery eyes, and I'm like, I'm the cobbler around here. In fact, I was like running mental circles around them in my patent leather sandals, and if you stop by my shop today, you can get them for 20% discount. A spokesperson for the Caesar for Emperor campaign had this to say, quote, "This is more than disorderly conduct among leadership. This is a deliberate attack against the populace by the state, and a horrific example of tyranny and corruption. Our government clearly needs to make an example of these two and make some serious changes in leadership." So considering the safety concerns of the population, the question on all of our minds is this: is it time for the Senate to step down and for us to move to a more stable form of government, such as an imperial one? This has been PCR News, the news you can trust. Good evening and welcome to ACR News. In a shocking new report, Senators Marullus and Flavius have been arrested and publicly shamed with no clear or meaningful accusations against them. The charges, for which our beloved potentate Caesar summarily removed them from office, are charges of vandalism. Now, when you or I think of vandalism, we think of the destruction of property, such as spray painting the side of the Capitol. But the vandalism in question here was simply removing wreaths from statues. What permanent or costly damage was incurred by the removal of a wreath? And the wreaths in question weren't even government property. We could make a case that the two were cleaning up the Capitol area. How would you like to be publicly shamed and have your job stripped away from you simply for redecorating? The real crime committed here was the droves of plebeians who thought they could carelessly disregard their work. Our society functions because we all put in labor and an effort to make it run. And yet, for questioning these plebeians in their disregard for our communities, Marullus and Flavius were taken down. The truth is that the pressure on these senators is clearly a demonstration of Caesar's complete intolerance to opposing political opinions. You don't like the man on top? Well, you're scrutinized and arrested, all because of your political opinions. That's the definition of tyranny. And if the Senate caves to the increasing pressure, we could have a dictator holding all of this power and having a say in everything. This has been ACR News. News you can trust. Thanks for watching. You can click to watch Act 2 or to watch a different Shakespeare episode. And I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.